Now I'm going to begin with the story of King David. But before we can get to King David, we need to first talk about King Saul. We had Samuel, the priest that we learned about, that as a little boy was dedicated at the temple to go work with Eli. And God raised him up as a great leader of Israel. So here he is, the priest, presiding over Israel, when the people of Israel come to him and say, "We want to be like the other countries around us. We want to have a king." He says, "No, this is not pleasing to God. God wants to be your king. He doesn't want you to be ruled over by a person." And they say, "No, we want to be just like the other kingdoms, and we want a king." So Samuel goes to the Lord and asks him about this, and God says, "Give the people what they want." So he goes and God sends him out to anoint a man named Saul. Now Saul epitomized everything the people were looking for: strong, tall, handsome. So he becomes the king. But this is contrary to God's wishes. So he ends up becoming king, but he's not a good king. He makes a lot of mistakes, and eventually God takes any kind of blessing he had on Saul away from him. And one of the things that plagues Saul is he ends up being plagued by an evil spirit. So during this time that he's being plagued by an evil spirit is the time that we start learning about David. So in the city of Bethlehem lives a man named Jesse who has many sons. And God sends Samuel to Bethlehem to go anoint one of Jesse's sons to be the next king. Well, Saul's still king. So Samuel goes to this town and says, "Jesse, bring your boys to me. I'm going to anoint one of them." And Jesse brings out his sons. And he sees the first one, and Samuel says, "Oh, this has got to be it." And God says, "Nope." And then he brings out the next one, and he says, "Oh, this is, nope. How about, nope. What about, no." All these boys keep coming up to him, and none of them are the one. And finally, Samuel goes, "Jesse, do you have any other sons?" And Jesse says, "Well, yeah, my youngest, but he's just out being a shepherd with the sheep. I didn't even," the implication, "I didn't even bring him to you. He wasn't even worthy. He's just the runt of the litter. I didn't bring him here." And Samuel says, "Well, go get him. We're not going to have this feast without him." And so they send for David, and David comes in, and the minute he comes over, God says, "That's the one. That's the man that I have in mind for the king." And this was, again, we're thinking in an earthly way, you would want the oldest, the strongest, the best. And here was this boy who was very young. He is called ruddy, handsome boy, but he's still a boy. So he anoints him with oil. And this is the same type of thing he had already done with Saul, where he went and anointed him with oil before he became king. There's a succession of things that happen in Saul's life. Well, then David goes back out with the sheep. Things are just back to normal again. And we hear nothing about David becoming king until Saul starts having an evil spirit that's tormenting him. And he says, "I don't know what to do about this evil spirit. It's really bothering me." His advisors say, "Let's get somebody to come in here and play the harp for you. Maybe that can soothe you." So they search around for somebody, and they end up calling Jesse and saying, on the telephone, going to Jesse and saying, "Send your son David to come and play the harp for Saul." David was a harpist. He knew how to do this, and he went in and he comes and plays the harp for Saul. Well, Saul becomes so soothed by it that he wants David to be there a lot. And so David is there a lot playing the harp for him. David goes back home, and he's not with Saul all the time. And one day, while he's back home, his dad says, "Hey, there's a war going on. The Philistines have set up camp. They're all on one side, and the Israelites are all on another side. They're waiting here for this battle. Will you go send your brothers some food?" So we see David leave from the fields, and here is a statue of King David, a little engraving, a carving of King David as a shepherd holding the sheep and leading the sheep out there. And Jesus is often called our shepherd, and we're compared to sheep throughout the entire Bible.